Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another in our webinar series on eIDAS for SMEs. Today's webinar is the benefits of eID and trust services in the online retail sector. My name is John Sharma. I'm chair of the European Association for E-Identity and Security, EMA, and I will be taking the session today. Some housekeeping. Please can you enter any questions in the chat box in the right-hand side in the panel, and what we'll be endeavoring to answer those questions towards the end of the webinar. Any questions that we can't answer, we will address them offline afterwards and contact you with regards to that. Thanks, that will help ensure the flow. The agenda of today's webinar is first off a brief introduction from myself, then John Switters, who is Senior Research Associate at the Lisbon Council, will talk about the opportunities for eID and trust services in the online retail sector. Then John Eric Setstos, who's VP of Identity and Innovation at Signicat AS, will present 3 study cases on the topic as well, specifically on the online retail, and will explain how eIDAS can be used. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A session and draw some conclusions. What's often asked is, why do we actually need to use eIDAS in the online retail sector at all? The reason is really that it's to help make a safe and easy use of eID and trust services, not only for citizens in your own member state, but for all citizens across the whole EU as part of the digital single market. In particular, eIDAS permits you to recognize eIDs from other member states. They're called notified eIDs, and provides a single set of rules for trust services and things like digital signatures, etc., wherever you are in the EU. That means that your market can grow and you can address the entire EU. To bear in mind that there's no obligation for the private sector to actually implement eIDAS, but its use between counterparties is a real good way to reduce transaction risk and to move and provide better services and increase your market, of course. By implementing eIDAS, SMEs in the online retail sector are able to extend that reach, not only to the EU geographically, but also to citizens wherever they are in the EU, no matter what European state. eIDAS addresses the eID and trust services. This particular webinar in the series focuses on online retail sector using eID and trust services. The next webinar will be looking at the benefits of eIDAS in the transport sector itself. We have all of these webinars are recorded and available online. So I'd like to pass directly on to John Switters, Senior Research Associate at the Lisbon Council, and he will talk about the opportunities for eID and trust services in the online retail sector. Over to you, John.
Thank you, John, very much for the introduction, and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 5th webinar in the eIDAS for SMEs webinar program. Now, it's my job today to provide you with a brief introduction to the online retail sector, and then to give an overview of the opportunities that exist for using electronic identification, eID, and trust services in the sector. So, to begin with, I'd like to provide an overview on eID and trust services to ensure that we all have the same understanding before we get into the more sector-specific details. So, eID stands for electronic identification, and put simply, it's a way to prove your identity online. Now, you can potentially use eID to access both online public and private services. With regards to the public services, it's worth highlighting that the eIDAS regulation provides for the mutual recognition of notified eIDs in all member states. In other words, member states who have notified their national eID schemes to the European Commission can ensure that their citizens can use their eIDs when accessing public services in other member states. Regarding the use of eID for private services, the eIDAS regulation does not apply. It is therefore voluntary for member states to open up their national eID schemes to the private sector, as John Sharma had recently mentioned earlier in the introduction. Now, the regulation itself mentions that member states are encouraged to allow the private sector to voluntarily use notified eID schemes for identification purposes when needed for online services. So let's have a look at some examples of the use for electronic identification. You can use electronic identification, for example, for the online declaration of your taxes, which is quite widely used throughout Europe. You can also use it to access e-health services. And finally, you could use it to open a bank account remotely. So let's have a quick recap on the actual benefits of eID, specifically focusing on those benefits for SMEs. Now, eID or electronic ID benefits from strong authentication. It provides security for SMEs. It acts as a safeguard for businesses and their customers when they're using an eID to interact together. eIDs are also up to date. For example, an eID can be revoked if it is stolen. It can also be updated, ensuring that your business or businesses have the latest information on their customers. eID is also time-saving. It saves time, and this is something that usually goes hand in hand with cost saving. As services can now be carried out remotely, this reduces waiting time, delivery delays, and also reduces the need, for example, to print documents, for example. And this also provides for a more enjoyable experience for customers, something that particularly is of particular interest in the online retail sector. eID, another benefit is cost saving. It can save significant costs in identity management activities, and these efficiency gains can lead to saving. eID is also flexible. A private eID solution can be tailored to your services, your company's services, for example. And finally, eIDs, they're convenient. The automatic transfer of data makes transactions faster and less prone to mistakes. For example, if your customer or a customer wants to access your services by using an eID, they may not have to open an account. This leads to more convenience for them and also for your business. So moving on to trust service solutions, the other kind of leg or arm of this of the regulation. These trust services are electronic services that aim to increase the confidence of EU citizens and businesses when carrying out electronic transactions, particularly those that take place cross-border. So here we're talking about when the business and the customers are located in different countries. Now, there are different trust services under the eIDAS regulation that serve different purposes, and they are featured in the image that you have below on your screen. So let's go through them one by one, just to have a recap. So firstly, we have e-signature, which is represented by the ES on your screen. Now, this is the expression in an electronic form of a person's agreement to the content of a document or set of data. Now, it's probably the most well-known trust service and perhaps most well-used trust service out of all of these 5 that are featured on your screen. Next, we have e-timestamp, which is represented by the ET on the screen. Now, e-timestamps link an electronic document to a particular time, providing evidence that the document existed at that specific point in time. They're rarely used as a standalone solution, but are often accompanied by other trust services such as e-signatures, for example. Next, we have e-seal, which is represented by the ESE symbol on your screen. And now these are actually similar in their function to the traditional business stamp. It's important to highlight here that e-seals are used only by legal persons, for example, a business, whilst e-signatures are used by natural persons, such as you or I. Now, e-seals themselves, they ensure the integrity and the origin of a document. Next, we have qualified website authentication certificates, and my favorite acronym, QUACs. And now these are actually electronic certificates that prove to your customer that your company website is trustworthy and reliable. They also ensure that the website links to the person to whom the certificate is registered. Finally, we have ERDS, which stands for Electronic Registered Delivery Service. And this service allows users to send documents or data electronically in a secure way. It also provides proof of sending and receipt, and ensures that the document has not been tampered with on its journey. So here we have a slide that's similar to the one that I mentioned earlier on for eID, but the benefits for trust services are a little different. So let's go through them. Firstly, we have accountability. Now, an important benefit for trust services is accountability. Trust services can provide proof of signatures, sending, receiving, and sealing of documents. Next, we have security. Now, this is a very big benefit, business benefit of trust services, as businesses can become more secure by implementing trust services within their own business processes. As with eID, trust services can also lead to time saving, as many jobs can be and transactions can be completed remotely, reducing waiting time, delivery delays, and the printing of documents. An improvement, trust services can also lead to the improvement of customer experiences, as they make the interaction between a customer and the business more enjoyable and convenient. Next, we have paper trail. Now, trust services can improve the way that documents are tracked. And here we're talking about an electronic paper trail. And this can be achieved, for example, through the use of electronic registered delivery services and e-timestamps. And finally, and perhaps the most important one, as it even features in the name of the services, is trust. Now, trust services build trust and confidence in the online world and in cross-border transactions. And here, just on that final note, I think it's important to note that all of the trust services can be used in the cross-border context. And obviously, this is one of the main aspects of the eIDAS regulation itself. Just one final note on the trust services. When we speak about trust services, we tend to speak about qualified and non-qualified trust services. So what do these actually mean? So let's have a brief look at that. Qualified trust services, or the term qualified trust services, is used for those trust service providers who can prove that the trust services provided by them fulfill the requirements laid down in the eIDAS regulation. Now, they can identify themselves. So these trust service providers can identify themselves by using the EU trust mark that you can see on your screen, which is the little blue padlock with a tick in it. Now, this is optional, so they're not obliged to do it, but they can identify themselves using this mark. You can also find a list of trust service providers, both qualified and non-qualified, on the trusted list browser on the URL, which is featured on your screen. So what are non-qualified trust services? So non-qualified trust service providers often offer solutions that are similar to those offered by qualified trust service providers. However, they're called non-qualified because they simply haven't gone through the official process to ensure that the services provided by them comply with the requirements established under the eIDAS regulation. So before we move on to the more sector-specific information, I would just like to remind you all that there were specific webinars focusing on the benefits of both eID and trust services. And the recordings for these webinars can be found on the eIDAS for SMEs website, for which we will provide the URL later on in this presentation. So now moving on to the main focus of today's webinar, at least, and that is how eID and trust services can be used in the online retail sector. Let's start with a little bit of context about the industry itself. I think it's safe to say that the retail sector as a whole is undergoing a period of transformation at present in various different across the EU. The consumer is in control, and the use of technology is driving change in shopping behavior, both online and in the physical stores themselves. We're witnessing a strong growth in online sales. For example, in the UK, online sales now account for almost 20% of retail sales, growing at 10 times the rate of store sales in the first half of 2018. And here we can see kind of the need for eID and trust services, as secure electronic transactions are particularly important for business conducted online. So there's a great opportunity here for the implementation of these services. If we look at the key themes of the online retail sector, key trends, key themes, again, just to provide us with a little bit of context before moving onto the implementation of eID and trust services here, we see the following. We can see a mixing of the digital services with the physical stores. Now, online retail is becoming a core part of the physical shopping experience itself. Retailers are realizing that perhaps the biggest impact digital services can have on their business is actually in store. So some retailers, online retailers, are actually turning back to physical stores to help them grow their business and help provide additional services to their customer. However, these stores are obviously very different to the regular high street stores that we're used to, trying to replicate the online experience in the offline world. Next, we have innovation to improve customer service. And here we're seeing the introduction of technologies such as augmented reality, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence, which are set to transform the entire customer experience. And that's both for online retail and offline retail. And I think these technologies will also help bridge the two shopping experience, both online and offline. And they will provide more immersive experiences and also a more personalized shopping experience. Another trend is the fact that the customers and the competition are changing constantly. There's an increase in payment postponed services such as online checkout list stores, and a growth in try before you buy services, which are particularly popular amongst the millennial customer. Finally, last but not least, the importance of culture. Brand authenticity and sustainability are becoming increasingly important as consumers want to associate themselves with brands that represent their beliefs, their views, and their values. Okay, so now we've had a bit of an overview of what's happening in the industry and sector itself. What is the potential for the use of eID and trust services here? So in general, businesses benefit from security. So here we're talking about multi-factor authentication, and this can be brought about through electronic identification. This electronic identification can also help businesses to expand their customer base, as we saw in previous examples. Trust services in general also enable the authentication of the customer's identity and help confirm the purchase of goods online. Now, digging deeper and looking at the different processes in the sector, we can also see specific implementation possibilities and opportunities for both trust services and electronic identification. For example, in the customer onboarding process, the qualified website authentication certificates, or QACs, help increase consumer trust in the websites where they're browsing, and it help avoid data phishing. Also, we have electronic ID here, electronic identification, which can help provide a trusted verification of a client's identity, which is particularly important for the purchase of restricted goods, such as alcohol, or high-value transactions, for example, the sale of art. If we look at another business process in the online retail sector, for example, experience management, we see that e-signatures here provide for the remote signing of documents such as purchase orders, confirmations, and delivery receipts. This remote, the ability to sign these documents remotely can lead to a cost reduction and therefore more streamlined processes. Here we also see that electronic identification can improve operational efficiency by easing the procedure for customers to complete a transaction online. Finally, in delivery management, we see that e-timestamps can certify the time of signing on a delivery receipt and lead to the enhanced tracking of deliveries for companies. So let's have a look now at a scenario, an example scenario, where we can see where these trust services and the electronic identification means fit in to an ordinary business process. So I ask you to think that the audience here to imagine a scenario where you are a specialist online wine retailer and that you're based in Germany, for example. Now, a customer in Poland is wishing to purchase wine for a family party, let's say, and they're browsing on your company website. Now, due to the fact your company has a qualified website authentication certificate, it ensures the consumer that your website can be trusted. Now, this also helps avoid data phishing and increases the consumer trust from the outset. So the consumer has seen the products that you have for sale online. They're interested in a certain box of wine and they want to buy it. So using the client's electronic identification, your company can verify and validate their information electronically. And this includes validating their age. So we can be ensured that they are actually old enough to purchase alcohol, and the sale will go through. Once the order has been validated, the wine is then dispatched to the customer, and the customer uses an e-signature to confirm the delivery, and an e-timestamp is used on the delivery receipt to track the order for the company. And this leads to reduced costs through streamlined processes and enhanced document tracking. I think it's also here important to notice and highlight the fact that you're expanding your customer base through this secured ability to validate the client's information electronically. You can also extend your services cross-border. So we will go further into detail into more practical real-life examples of implementation in the last part of the webinar today. But just before we move on, I wanted to highlight the resources that are actually available for small and medium-sized enterprises on eIDAS and how eID and trust services can actually be implemented into daily business operations. So we have a set of downloadable infographics covering various different sectors, such as the financial services sector, transport sector, and professional services sector. And there you have the URL where you can download these these infographics. Don't worry though, as I said, this webinar will be recorded and will be hosted online, so you can look up this information at a later stage. There is also the eIDAS checklist for businesses, where SMEs can use the checklist to see which eID and/or trust service solution best meets your business needs. Now, this is available in a downloadable PDF version, and through a series of different questions, according to your business needs, it will guide the user to the most appropriate solution or solutions. There is also an interactive tool available whereby the user can actually test out electronic ID and trust service solutions in a simulated environment through real life use cases, and also through the provision of sector specific examples. Again, the URL for this interactive tool is provided on screen. Now, this is particularly an example to highlight. There is an SME guidebook available called eIDAS Made Easy, and this will help the users to understand the basic concepts related to eID and trust services, and also to discover how to implement them through the eIDAS different resources that are available. For example, the checklist, the interactive tool, etc. And again, the URL is provided on the screen. So to access all of these resources, you can visit the eIDAS for SMEs web pages, which are featured on the Digital Single Market website. Again, the URL is placed there below. Also, if you'd like to keep up to date with news about this pilot program and the resources available for SMEs in Europe, then please do follow us on Twitter at eID_EU, or you can tweet using the hashtag eIDAS for SMEs, or follow our Facebook account, the Digital Signal Market. Finally, we wanted to highlight if you're interested in discussing eIDAS related issues with other organizations and like-minded businesses, there is an eIDAS observatory available on the URL below. And this is a virtual community of stakeholders that discusses issues related to the uptake of eIDAS solutions to help promote the use of cross-border electronic identification and trust services in Europe. Now, it's open to everyone, businesses, individuals, public administrations, and representatives from various different sectors. And the aim here really is to promote knowledge sharing and to develop initiatives, innovative initiatives on this subject. So please do visit the observatory and join and contribute however you may wish to do so. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. I would like to now hand over to John Eric Setzors, the VP of Identity and Innovation at Signicat AS, who will provide a study case, a real life study case, on the implementation of electronic identification and trust services in the online retail sector. So over to you, John Eric.
Thank you, John, for a very good introduction to the eIDAS services. And again, just to re-emphasize, I mean, one of the core things here is the eID. And the eID is an electronic identifier that you have verified once and you can use many times. And that's a benefit for me as the user, and it's a benefit for the businesses who knows that I'm verified. I live in Norway. We have a very successful eID in Norway called BankID, and most people use that almost every day for a number of different services, of course, for banking, for government, for insurance, for health, for a lot of different things. So I'm going to provide you with some real-life examples of using the trust services. And these existed actually before eIDAS. The big thing with eIDAS is these will now become also cross-border, so you can utilize them also between countries. So, okay. Like I said, BankID was established in 2004. And already in 2005, it was possible in Norway with electronic stores, you had online electronic store, to buy products and do consumer finance. And this was possible because of BankID. The shop, the electronic shop, had a verified identifier. So you could trust that, and by using this, you could then provide consumer financing. Okay. What's happening? For some reason, I'm not getting the next slide here. Could someone please forward this for me? Thank you. So, of course, with the eIDs, I like to call eIDs harmonization of eIDs across Europe, meaning that my eID, the one I use in my home country, in my case, BankID, shall be recognized in other countries for services in other countries. That could be government services if I have some business there, or as in this example I'm going to show, for retail and other services. And of course, this will expand the market for the stores because they have a bigger reach of customers. No. Next slide, please. So the first example I'm going to do is actually this consumer purchase of TV with finance, where the online retail store, you want to maximize the penetration. You want to reach as many people as possible. Currently, going outside your own country poses a whole lot of issues, and especially if you're going to do consumer finance. And you want to reach as many as possible. So you're using the eID in this case to establish the identity of the customer. You know who you're dealing with. You will be provided with the address. And of course, this is convenient for me as the user. I don't have to provide all this information whenever I go into a new store. I just use my eID and the store gets the information that it needs. And then, as the trust service, I use the electronic signature to sign the contract. So from the consumer, I access the website. I use my eID. The vendor will know who I am, very simply. It will have a trusted identity. I will then go through the normal process of finding the product, checking the stock, etc. Then I come to the checkout process. And this is where I now, using my electronic ID, can apply for consumer finance. And because my identity has already been verified, this is a simple process. Then I will sign this using electronic signature to verify that I accept the terms and conditions of that. And then my product will be shipped to me. And again, trust is essential here. Trust from the vendor, that the vendor knows who is dealing me, and also trust for me as a customer, that I know I'm at the real store and not some store wanting to scam me. So we look at this, we could see the various trust services used throughout the process here. The consumer, as mentioned, I use the eID for accessing the store. The web certificate is used so I know which store I'm dealing with. And then this, of course, depends on the store, what you're doing, which services you want to use, but it's possible to use a lot of them very comprehensively, or you could just use a subset of this. The point is, for the vendor, it's very easy to provide consumer financing. For the consumer, it's very easy to get the financing to buy the product you want. And again, as said, this is operational in Norway. It's being used a lot. With eIDs, you will increase the customer reach. The stores will be able to reach all of Europe. And as a consumer, I will be able to shop from stores all around Europe. So as said, even though you're not residing in the country, you can use this. It's trusted across border, and that's the really nice thing about the eIDs. If my identity is trusted in Norway, it will be trusted then in other countries as well. And then combining this with the payments as well as consumer financing across Europe. For my next example, we go to age verification, which John also mentioned. There are several services where you need to verify your age if you're going to buy tobacco or alcohol, if you're going to do gambling. And I'm going to look at another one which is quite interesting. It's the tanning saloons. So a law was passed a couple of years back in Norway that you had to prove your age. You had to be over a given age to use the tanning saloons. And of course, most of the tanning saloons are unmanned, and they were worried, do we need to man this? And is that going to cost a lot of money to do that? But then the realization came that why not use Bank ID for this? Bank ID provides information about age. You could then sign up with the app. You use Bank ID to verify your age, and then you use the app to unlock the doors in the tanning saloons. So again, the consumer, you access the website, or actually you could use an app as you normally do. You would then, with the app, use your Bank ID to verify your identity. But your identity is not really the important part. The important part is that you are of the required age. Then you use the app or the website to find a slot, and then you could place the order also directly within the app. And again, the trust is essential here. The providers, they need to fulfill the regulation requirements saying that all their customers are over a given age. And the consumer wants to make sure it's getting the services they're paying for, and a simple way to both verify the age and pay for the services. So again, looking at this, eID is used for as the core. I use my eID to verify my age. This access certificate proves that I'm in the contact with the right vendor. Then I go through the booking process and I book a slot. I could use an e-signature for that, and then I can do the payment also directly from within the app. And then that would enable, that is already in use today. This is being used, but you have to have a Norwegian Bank ID. We have a lot of students coming here that may not necessarily have that. With the eIDAS, it would be possible for any residents of any other European country to use their home eID for this same process. And that would then make it very simple then for the tanning studios to fulfill the obligations and get new customers. And also to re-emphasize, this is just one example of the age verification. There are several other things, like I mentioned, gambling, buying alcohol and tobacco, which also requires verification of age. And the scenario would be similar. You would have a broader reach of customers. In my final example, I'm going to look at a chat service. We are finding that chatting with customers is becoming more and more common. More and more organizations have a possibility to chat with their consumers. And they also want to simplify this so they can make an agreement during the chat. So instead of what's typically done today, you do the chat and you discuss and you agree on something, and then you go completely out of the chat to go through the actual process of the agreement. So again, real life example, which is being used by some organizations, but currently not eIDAS. This would be Europe-wide. So let's take this example. This is just an example chat session talking with John Viking. This one says verified by eID. Just to clarify, eID is the Dutch scheme used by the Dutch bank. So it's similar to the Bank ID we have in Norway, which is defined by the banks. So, but this is just another eID. So this would say verified with eIDAS in the future. So we're having a chat here with John Viking is looking for some sneakers, and customer support says, we have them, what size, and he has to answer the size. And they ask, should we just ship to your default address? Because they know the address. I'm already verified with the eID. I don't have to provide anything. So as John Viking, I've just entered the chat session. I have identified myself using my eID, and then the store knows this information about me. I don't have to fill in anything. I don't have to give my name. I don't have to give my address. And then John answers the size and send to default address, and John says yes. And then you could then integrate this directly with electronic signature. So customer support would say, please accept by choosing the sign button. John Viking would sign and then provide his credentials to verify this, and you're done. And this makes for a very good user experience. We're seeing a lot or more and more people like this chat session of doing things. And again, this is just an example of buying something. This could be a chat with an insurance company saying, well, I need to insure my pet. And, can go to the discussion and agree on that, because there could be some, specifics. And when you agree, you don't even leave the chat session. You just do the e-signature directly from within the chat session. Makes it very convenient for the user, very simple for the store. And again, you access the website or the app. The provider recognizes your eID. You go through the chat session, and then you agree on something at the end. Oh, next slide, please. And again, trust is important in this scenario, both from the consumer side and from the provider side. And again, we see the use of the trust services. eID is of core of everything. The user always uses eID to identify himself or herself. The vendor always using the web certificate to identify the store, so you can trust that. You go through the session, and then you can do an e-signature directly in the session. And as said, these are all real-life examples being used by customers today, although not in an eIDAS context, but within a given country. With the eIDAS, you will be able to reach customers across the European Union, and they can always use their own eID. And that's the big benefit with the eIDAS. You get a much larger customer reach. And then by embedding these services then into whatever you provide. I said these are just 3 examples: consumer financing, age verification, and then integrating with chat service to show what's possible to do here and what is being done, and which will be enhanced when eIDAS comes into place, so you can reach across borders. So that concludes my examples, and I'm handing back to Jon Sharma for the conclusion of this session.
Thank you very much, John. That was very interesting indeed. And the chat concept, I think, is something that's going to be growing more and more. And a legally compliant chat is going to be very interesting indeed. So we're going to now look at some of the questions that we have. We have a number of questions, and we'll see if we can answer as many as we can between now and the top of the hour. So the first question we have is, what about all the applications that would have to support a Swedish personal number that and only we have in Sweden? It's obviously the question comes from Sweden, and this actually applies to any eID at all. Would we need to rebuild every application that would be in this solution to support every country, or is there some central mapping service out there? John, can I give that to you, please?
Yes, I can answer that. And I mean, the question comes back to, and it's a very relevant question, because all business systems in Sweden and Norway, especially the official ones, are based on this personal identification number. And of course, you cannot rebuild all the system. It doesn't really make sense at all. That would be way too much work. So discussions now to handle that kind of situation is to set up in the gateways to handle mapping. So you will then have to provide a temporary or what we call in Norway, either a temporary or a D number. I don't know exactly what that's called in Sweden, but typically foreign students in Norway get assigned a D number. So you will then assign that, and you will provide a mapping between the eID of the person using the service and this national identification number.
Thank you. The next question that we have is is it possible to use private eID information for private services? eID for private services. Many EU countries will only use it for their own services. I understand that to mean that can you use eID information wherever you are for whatever information that the eID transfers. Do you want to answer that, John, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that has not really been a lot of focus on with the eIDs, but we see that really coming into the future now, is limit what you provide. I mean, in my example, I assumed when you use your eID, you provide all the information about yourself to whoever you're talking to. But I think what we will see more and more in the future is the possibility to limit that, to say, for the tanning studio, I don't want to provide my address and all that other information. I only provide proof of age, not even my age, only proof that I'm over a given age. So I think that's something we're going to see more and more in eID in general, the possibility for me as the consumer to limit what I decide to share with the whoever I'm talking to.
Okay, thank you. Another question here is, if I use BankID, would I need to do any additional identification to get a qualified signature? Usually the trusted service provider requires some sort of identification. Would BankID be sufficient there?
To answer that question in general, I mean, qualified signature is, as Jon mentioned earlier, when you're qualified, it's a higher level of trust in the signatures. So you have electronic signatures, what we call advanced signatures, and qualified electronic signatures. And of course, yes, you would have to somehow identify yourself during the signing process. And the qualified also put rules on the strength of that identification, how strongly you are identified. And as far as I know, BankID will be strong enough to provide a qualified electronic signature when such services exist. So you will be able to use that. And I think we're going to see more of those popping up.
Thank you. That follows on. There's another follow-on question with regards to eIDAS supporting signing, and the slides indicate that. The question is, do I need an external solution for signing documents, for example? That definitely is your area, John Eric.
Yeah. Well, remember, eIDAS is just the framework. You will need to integrate the actual services to use. So that depends on which services you are deciding to use. I can just talk about our platform on that, which provides both the eID and the signature and the seals as well. So we as an organization provide that. We do not provide the access certificates that were mentioned. That will have to be another organization. But in general, integrating with these signing services is in general a very simple job to do.
Thank you. That's great. A question about abandonment rate due to the poor user experience with the eID services. Will it be higher in the retail sector, do you think? Do you reckon that the eIDAS will make it smoother. What are the views on this? This is a question that's come in.
Yes, we did a research earlier this year that showed actually abandonment rates for financial services is more than 50%, which means more than half of the customers waiting to get in the door actually run away. For two reasons: it's too complex and they don't really understand the language and so on. The advantage with electronic IDs is that you are already verified. You do not have to provide all this information. And in Norway, onboarding to a new bank is really boring. I go to the new bank, I use bank ID, I'm a customer. It's as simple as that. So from that perspective, I would say, yes, the abandonment rates would go down because from the user perspective, it will be a lot simpler. I won't have to fill in all these forms with all this data, provide identity papers and whatnot. I use my eID, I'm done.
Fantastic, thank you. Next question is self-sovereign identity. Will e-signatures be able to be generated, as far as I understand the question, from sovereign identities, or will they have to just be legally eIDAS compliant from a government eID or something similar, or from a qualified service provider? John, do you want to answer that? John, Eric?
Very, very interesting question, actually. I haven't touched on that one before. I would say there's nothing preventing that. I mean, what eIDAS says is that you have to, beyond reasonable doubt, know the identity of the user who is signing in this case. In general, it's referred to the eIDAS framework with levels of assurance, but the eIDAS itself doesn't specify how the eIDs are managed or handled, or the exact details in every aspect on how this is done. So from that perspective, if an self-sovereign identity can be proven to have strong enough level of assurance, I don't see any problems of using that for generating an electronic signature.
Yeah, can I also add that perhaps as each qualified service provider who will be issuing out qualified e-signatures are responsible within their own legal jurisdiction in the country that they're operating, then there may be slight variations with regards to that. But in general, I would say, echo John's words in saying that if it provides with beyond reasonable doubt that it can be used, then you can, that it's can be identifiable with the individual, then a qualified provider will be able to provide that. On the other hand, if you're actually generating an eID from that, then there may be some additional questions with regards to how that is notified, and that's something that we can get back to you offline on that.
Right, and it could also be an issue of liability in this case. When you have an eID provider issuing eIDs, they are also liable for if there are problems, if something happens, and so on. So that could also be a challenge with the SSI identities.
Thank you. Now we have time for one or two more questions. So when I use eIDAS today on some sites, there is no country to choose from. Is that an indication that there's no login providers connected to eIDAS? So I think that is. Do you want John Switters to answer that one, please?
Hi there, John. Yeah, I'm not sure I completely understand the question that's being asked here, actually.
Yeah, I think that when let's read again. When I use eIDAS today on some sites, there's no country to choose from. Is that an indication that there's no login provider connected to eIDAS? John, Eric, do you want to answer this, or shall I?
Yeah, no, I can do that. Remember, we are
Yeah.
still very early in the eIDAS
Yeah.
implementation. There are not many notified eIDs in Europe yet. I know there are a lot in pipeline to be notified. So I think this is just a symptom that we are not there yet.
Thank you. That's I'd like to echo that, and the fact that you'll slowly start seeing the countries to choose from growing, and then the numbers of countries within that to actually expanding, and that will come out over the next year or so. You'll start seeing lots and lots more notifications and EIDs available. I have a question following on to that. There's an EU law that says that it must be online by 29th of September. I think that is with regards to the first 29th of September date was the first notified services coming online, and that notified eID, and that was Germany. So from the German point of view, the German eID was active within eIDAS from the 29th of September, but other eIDs that have not been formally notified yet, will still not need to be online to the next batch, which comes out, I think, early next year. John, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I know there are a lot of schemes in the pipeline for being notified. As far as I know, Bank ID or Norway will be notified in February, and I don't have a list of exactly when the others will be notified, but this is now happening over time. So I agree with you. Within a year's time, hopefully, we will see this more and more available.
Thank you. One more question, and that is, I'm an owner of a small business and wonder why there's so much regulations over eIDAS. For example, eIDAS defines multiple types of electronic signatures, most of which are very closed for use and very rarely used on these services. But to support all these types involves extra costs. Is there a simplification plan for eIDAS related regulations? John Eric, do you want to answer that, or I can? John Eric?
Yeah, no, I can do that. So remember, eIDAS is created for the public services, right? So that's the focus, and it has a lot of focus on high security. It's a lot of talk about qualified signatures, and of course, implementing the qualified services and qualified signatures is complex. It's more work. It's probably in a lot of cases not necessary. However, this depends on the law in different countries what you need. eIDAS defines 3 levels of signatures. They call electronic signature, advanced electronic signature, and qualified electronic signatures. And in many cases, I would assume, especially for the small and medium enterprise, advanced or even just electronic signature would be simple. Just to mention, electronic signature could be anything. It could be me sending you a text message, yes, I approve that offer. And according to Norwegian law, that would be sufficient to close a deal. While in other countries, it might be different. So it depends on your jurisdiction. It depends on the risk you're willing to take. So in a lot of cases, you can simplify. And the same with identities. You may not need the highest level of assurance. It's back to the risk factor. You have something to add, maybe, John?
Yeah, just to say that in the private sector, it's a risk environment that you choose to take. You don't need to, your business will know what level or should decide what level of risk they take, whether the business determines particularly about the level, let's say, of the importance of the transaction. So, for example, in banking, for example, of course, it's if you want to look at invitation or to open an account or to look at some account details, not your own personal ones, but how an account works, you don't need much identification at all. If you want to make a transaction, then you need higher identification, higher level of identification. So I'd like to finish off and thank all the people, everybody that's attended, everybody for the questions, and the presenters, John, Eric, and John Switters. Thank you very much indeed. This is going to be recorded. This is recorded and will be made available. I think online is going to be a real great mover with regards to eIDAS as people start taking more and more use of it and they see the benefits. Thank you very much indeed. The next webinar in the series is going to be on transport, and I look forward to seeing you all on November the, or hearing on November the 7th, and look forward to welcoming you. All information is available on the URL on the page now. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.